friends, welcome back. Today we're talking about solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. Grab your notebook, you're going to want to take some notes real quick. Okay, here's what I need you to write down. Pause the video if you need to and go ahead and write this guy down. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. Sorry, I moved that around. Had to get that paper from under there. All right, so this guy right here, quadratic formula, the stuff that's underneath that radical is called the discriminant. And your discriminant, if you find that, it's going to be, if it's positive, you're going to have two real solutions. If it's negative, you're not going to have any real solutions. You just write no solutions. If you're in Algebra 2, then you deal with imaginary numbers or complex numbers. We'll talk about that when you get there. If your discriminant is 0, it actually means you're going to have one real solution. Okay, and friendly reminder, standard form of our quadratics looks like this. All right, so let's dive in. One more note thing, rational answers, and that pink is kind of hard to see, I'm very sorry. Rational answers are answers that are perfect squares. Those are factorable. Irrational answers are ones that are non-perfect squares. So if your discriminant is a non-perfect square, it is irrational and not factorable. Okay, so let's take a look at our first example here. So we have 3x plus 5x equals 8. The very first thing you want to do is get this into standard form, which means you're going to set it equal to 0. So we're going to minus 8 from both sides. Now, so whenever you see an x squared, generally the best idea is to set it equal to 0. And then standard form means we put it in order. So x squared, then x to the 1, and then minus 8 equals 0. Okay, so our a is going to be 3. Our b is going to be 5, and our c is negative 8. Now remember, don't include your x squared or your x in your a or b or whatever we're going on there. Now, my advice to you is always start with your discriminant. I'm lazy. I want to do the easiest thing possible. If you start with your discriminant, if it's a negative, then you know straight away no solution. You don't have to write anything else down. So we're going to start with our discriminant. And I like to circle that, a reminder I'm using this guy right here, not this one up here. So I start with my discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. I encourage you to write that down every single time until you memorize it. This quadratic formula is going to live rent-free in your head until you're 40, I swear. Okay, so b squared minus 4ac. Now, it's vitally important that you use parentheses around your b, especially if it's a negative. In this case, it's a positive, so it doesn't really matter. But if it's a negative, you need to use parentheses because negative times a negative is always going to be a positive. So you're going to always have a positive in the front there. Minus 4 times our a, which is 3, times our c, which is negative 8. Mind your signs there. Negative 8. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see that closer. Now, 5 squared we know is 25. And a lot of you might be tempted to bring down that minus sign. Do not do that because remember, a negative times a negative is a positive. So you have to decide, is it a minus or is it a plus? Well, if you have two negatives, it's a plus. That's probably the biggest mistake I see is that kids just bring down that negative sign and then they accidentally subtract. Okay, so then we've got 12 times 8, which is 96. I hate making simple arithmetic errors on these videos, so I always double check. So 96, all right, we got 96 here. We add 25 to that, we end up with 121. 121 is a perfect square, so this is a factorable one that it's going to be rational because it's a perfect square and it's factorable. So we could have factored it at the beginning, but we're going to complete the square. All right, now that we have, and because this is positive, it means that we're gonna have two real solutions. Once you have your discriminant, you're ready to actually use your quadratic formula. And as a reminder, it's x equals negative b plus minus the square root of your discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Memorize that. X equals negative, and our b is 5, negative 5, plus minus the square root of our discriminant, which we already know is 121. All divided by 2 times our a, which is 3. All right, so now we got some cleaning up to do. We have x equals negative 5 plus minus. Now the square root of 121 is 11. So plus minus 11 over 6. This gives us two answers here. We have x equals negative 5 plus 11 over 6. And we have x equals negative 5 minus 11 over 6. So let's go ahead and simplify those guys. Let me scooch this over so you can see it. Okay, so and scooch this down so you can see it. All right, there we go. So we've got, that would be positive 6 over 6, which equals 1. And then this one, if we add the opposite there, we get negative 16 over 6. We can cut those in half and get negative 8 over 3. That's as reduced as it gets. So our answers are x equals 1 comma negative 8 over 3. Now remember, this x, this is where it crosses. If we were to graph this guy, right, this is where it would cross on the x-axis. And things that cross on our x-axis are called our x-intercepts. So when we write these, you can write them as your x-intercept. When x is 1, y is 0, right? Or better said, when y is 0, x is negative 8 over 3. So those are our two solutions. That's where it's going to cross on our graph. Okay, let's try a couple more here. So for our next one, we've got this guy right here. Let me adjust here. All right, so for example number 2, we have 2x squared minus 7 equals x. Again, you want to get this into standard form, so we need to set it equal to 0, minus x minus x. And remember, you can't combine these things because those aren't like terms. X squared and x can't be combined. So 2x squared minus x minus 7 equals 0. This is the one we're going to be using. Okay, so start with your discriminant. B squared minus 4ac. Our b is right here. It's a negative 1. Remember, if there's nothing there, it's a 1. So negative 1 squared minus 4 times our a, which is 2, times our c, which is negative 7. All right, quantity, or meaning parentheses, negative 1 squared is going to be positive 1, negative 1 times negative 1. And then we have a negative times another negative, so it's a positive here. 4 times 2 is 50, or 4 times 2 is 8, times 7 is 56. Math is hard today, apparently. So our discriminant is 57. Now 57 is not a perfect square, so that means that this solution is going to be irrational because we don't have a perfect square. But now that we have our discriminant, oh, one other thing, our discriminant is positive, so we're going to have two real solutions. Now that we have our discriminant, we're ready to use our quadratic formula. X equals negative b, and so we've got negative, and our b is negative 1 here. And if you have to write a, b, and c, that's totally helpful as well. Plus minus the square root of our discriminant, which we already know is 57, all divided by 2 times our a, and our a is 2 here, so 2 times 2. So let's clean this up. We get x equals a negative is really a positive, so we get 1 plus the square root of 1 plus minus the square root of 57 over 4. Now you always want to ask yourself, can I reduce that any further? Can I simplify, not reduce, simplify that radical? Is there a perfect square that's hidden in there? In this case, there's not, so this is your solution. Okay, so let's talk about this guy right down here. This one, immediately I look at that and I see all of those are divisible by 4. Make your life easier. Divide everything by 4. Divide by 4, divide by 4, divide by 4, divide by 4. So that gives us our new equation of x squared plus 10x minus 3 equals 0. Excellent job. Okay, so now we're ready to use our quadratic formula. Start with your discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, and our b is 10. So 10 squared minus 4 times our a, which is 1, and our c, which is negative 3. All right, so 10 squared is 100. Negative times a negative is a positive, so plus 4 times 1 is 4 times 3 is 12. So 112. Okay, so now that we've got our discriminant, we know it's positive, which means we're going to have two real solutions. Now that we have it, we're ready to use our quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, and our b right here is 10, plus minus the square root of our discriminant, which is 112, all divided by 2 times a, and our a is 1, so it's just going to be a 2. Okay, at this point we need to ask ourselves, is there a perfect square hidden in 112? And what I mean by that, so let's do a little bit of side work. I'm going to move that down here so you can see. So the square root of 112. Perfect squares, remember, are 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, all those, right? 2 times 2, 3 times 3, 4 times 4. 112, if I divide that by 4, you'll see that I end up with 28. So 4 and 28. 4 times 28. 28 has another hidden perfect square, which means I have not chosen the largest perfect square. So I do 112 divided by 9. No, that doesn't work. 112 divided by 16, and I get 7. Okay, 7 doesn't have another perfect square hidden in there, so I've chosen my largest one. Root 16, root 7. The square root of 16 is 4, and I encourage you to cross it out because I see a lot of kids accidentally bring down their radical. So the square root of 16 is 4, and then this is 7. All right, now that we've done that side work, we can take that information back up here. So we're going to say x equals negative 10 plus minus, and instead of the square root of 112, we're going to say 4 root 7. That's the side work we did. All divided by 2. Now, one last step on this, you have to ask yourself, do these three things have something in common? It has to be all three of them, not just the first two. You can't just divide this by 1, or divide this by 2 and get 1, divide this by 2 and get 5. You have to do all three. And they do. They all have a 2 in common. So if I factor out a 2, I end up with 2, negative 5, plus minus 2 root 7 over 2. And now I can cancel those out. So my final answer is negative 5 plus minus the square root of 2 root 7. That was a terrible 7 that I wrote there. All right, so that's how you use the quadratic formula to solve any quadratic equations that you have. Now, keep in mind, the quadratic formula will work for anything. We'll get into another video on how to choose the best of the 5 methods for solving quadratics, but the quadratic equation will work. Sometimes it's just overkill, so you want to be able to factor quickly and do those kinds of things. So we'll get into that in the next video. In the meantime, this is how you use the quadratic formula. If you have any questions, leave them below. Good luck, and we'll see you next time.